Hey Wargamers, this past weekend I attended the inaugural event for the 40K Chronicles, which is a narrative event held in Roseville, Minnesota at the Fantasy Flight Game Center. I had Mike on a few months ago at this point to talk about the event and kind of talk about narrative events in general, but particularly about this event, which was titled the Hadex Incursion. So it's basically set up to be what happens after the Great Rift forms and the Hadex anomaly is expanding, and what happens next. So I kind of want to give you some details on how that went and my general impression of the event overall, and then talk a little bit about my games and stuff like that. So if you're more into the fluffy side of things, the first half is going to be maybe a little bit more interesting to you. If you're more interested in how the actual games went, the second half is going to be a little bit more your thing. So, okay, let's start with the basics. Basically, the background for this is, as I said, the Hadex anomaly is expanding, and there are demons and ne'er-do-wells trying to take out 7 pylons on 7 different planets in the Jericho Reach. And those pylons are what are basically keeping the anomaly at bay. And so there are 2 different broad factions, Restoration and Destruction, that are trying to get control of these pylons. Now, the way that this actually manifested in the event is not necessarily how you would expect it. There were, Space Wolf players playing for Destruction. There are people on either side that you wouldn't really think narratively, just based on what's in the book, would end up on one side or the other. But it's a narrative event. You can make your own narrative, and there's always some cloak and dagger stuff going on in the 40K universe. So we had people on both sides that wouldn't necessarily be categorized as that by GW. So pretty cool. Meant that there was a lot of variability in gameplay and everything like that. But we were vying for 7 different planets. That didn't mean that we had 7 different tables. That meant there was actually like 18 different tables. And those different planets had multiple different battlefields on them for the most part. There was a few that just had one battlefield, but each of the different battlefields was unique. So they all had just glorious terrain, very well done. And it was all, fully painted, intricately detailed, beautiful terrain, high terrain density, just, really what you would hope to see in a 40K table. You saw it there, and I was just extremely impressed with that. But each table had its own mission during the first day, at least. Every mission was fine-tuned for that terrain set. So, for example, if there were Prometheum relays on that might give you some special rule, or might be involved in the objective or something like that. So, very narrative, fluffy missions that were centered around the terrain and fed into the overall narrative of the event. Additionally, different battlefields would have different rules or different modifiers on them. So there might be some planets that favored troops, or some planets that favored, or some battlefields that discriminated against flyers, or against psychers or something like that, or just things with low leadership. So these are all sorts of things that fed into the event being extremely diverse and fun. It was just fun, which was really awesome. And based on your individual performance, you were able to level up unique talent trees that would unlock pretty powerful stratagems. And if you've been paying attention to the Invasive Wargaming Facebook page over the past couple of weeks, you've probably seen a few of these pop up in the previews. But in general, there were 5 different talent trees that you could level up. Now, you got a level up. You could pick a different tier in each of these after each game, so you would always advance. But if you did particularly well in your game, you could acquire tokens, and those tokens could be expended to expedite your advancement. And basically, these 5 different talent trees worked kind of like the old talent trees in World of Warcraft or something like that, or Diablo, where you bought into tier 1, and then you could unlock tier 2, and then unlock tier 3, and the rewards got progressively better. And for the most part, they were they were very good stratagems, but they were not universally beneficial. So for me, for example, there were multiple talent trees that focused on assault or on characters or something like that, and that didn't really go with my army. So I decided to focus on a talent tree that first prioritized deployment, and then later on allowed you to get more command points right at the beginning of the game. So the ultimate stratagem in that particular talent tree was that at the beginning of the game you could expend 2 command points and then roll a d6, and that's how many command points you get. So basically, so long as you don't roll a 1, you're breaking even or gaining command points. So I was really excited about that, invested in that, and then I moved on to a talent tree that focused on technology, including things like giving 4-up invulnerable saves and improving your to wound rolls and your AP, stuff like that. So kind of gives you a sense. There are also things that were like +2 to charge, or you can move your units. You can move multiple units up to 6 inches at the beginning of the game, or things could attack after assaulting and things, or attack after advancing and stuff like that. So lots of close combat focused stuff, which was good because I think close combat armies need a boost with the current rule set. So very happy that these stratagems were implemented. They brought something unique to the event aside from just the mission design. Having these stratagems unlocked some new combos and got you thinking in different ways, and fed into the narrative as well. So really cool. One of the things that about those stratagems too is that they had these really professional looking stratagem cards produced that you used to do that. And I think that's kind of an underlying theme with this event is the production quality was outstanding. I tried to get a sense of how they actually went about doing that, but I have to say I didn't really walk away with a great idea of how they actually went about producing all this stuff. But apparently they partnered with people and got stuff produced, and just the production quality was great, including these really nice descriptions of each of the planets. And this is how the pairing worked. It wasn't paired like a tournament would be paired. It was not bracketed or anything like that. You just picked your battlefield and you picked your opponent. And so at each of the 18 different tables, they had a basically like a poster or a plaque that described the planet and then described that particular battlefield, and also give you a hint as to what types of units would be advantaged or disadvantaged, or what the special rule about that battlefield was. So that by itself I thought was really cool. And then in front of it they had two little like, I guess they almost look like coasters, like you would get at a bar, right? That they put your beer on, but they were two coasters that you would put your warlord on, and if you had arranged ahead of time to battle with someone, then you would both go and do that. Otherwise, you could just put your warlord on that coaster and wait for someone to put down next to you, and there's your opponent. So was very cool and very fun, and allowed a type of social interaction that wouldn't otherwise exist. I was really thankful for this because it allowed me to meet more people, make new friends, that sort of thing. And I think that's one of the best things about this type of event, is that it allows you to socialize more with a diverse crowd. So very happy with how that went. So overall, I had a lot of fun. I think this was a great tournament. Or it's not really even a tournament, it's a narrative event. And I had a great time. I'm really looking forward for the next event. And one of the things about it is that the narrative is going to continue. At least that's my understanding, is, what happened this year will carry on, and the next chapter of the story will be told next year. And maybe it's more of an anthology series. Maybe it's like True Detective or American Horror Story, where they're not necessarily connected. But overall, I can't wait to see what this team puts out next year, because this first year was just top notch. Very excited about it. I guess I should mention kind of how the grand narrative played out. There were a few special characters that did die. One of the restrictions that they had during the army construction phase was that only one of each named character could be brought across the entire event. So if I brought Farsight, no one else could bring Farsight. And if they fell in battle, there was a chance that they would either just be, kind of on the sideline recovering, or they could just be dead from a narrative standpoint. So in this case, Belial, at least, and I don't recall if there were other special characters that died as well, but Belial ate it. he got taken out by some Grey Knights. So that was unfortunate for Belial, I guess. But overall, the grand narrative was that in the end, the forces of destruction were successful, and the pylons fell, meaning that the Hadex anomaly is expanding. Jericho reach is falling to corruption, and this is of particular import for people like the Tau, because Jericho is right next to the Empire. It's also next to, I think it's the Sautek dynasty for the Necrons. But yeah, so there's going to be consequences to that. The scar is widening inside the galaxy, according to this narrative. So that's kind of a fun, ominous end to the narrative. And like I said, I can't wait to see what happens next year. Just overall, very happy with how the event went. Had a lot of fun. Loved how everything was constructed. Okay, so that's my general review of the event. Tell you what happened. For those of you that are more interested in my army list and how everything went, let's talk about that. But keep in mind, this is a narrative event. Like I said, it's not a tournament. It's not a competitive event. It's not meant to see who can beat down the other players to the maximum degree possible. It's for fun. And the goal was to have good games, and a degree of that is competitiveness, but there's a lot more to it. So don't read too much into anything in particular, and also keep in mind that all the lists were screened ahead of time. So there's consequences to that in terms of relative power of different lists and of different units and things like that. So, okay. My list, of course, was Tau Empire. I took a single battalion detachment, and I had a narrative here where I brought a cadre fireblade. His name was Shaznel Viorla Swiftcloak, and his deal is that he is an agent of the Farsight Enclaves operating within the Empire, specifically from Viorla, as his name would indicate. He's working to acquire resources for the enclaves well on official Empire business. And some of his comrades know, and some of his comrades don't. And so the ability that he has to operate and acquire resources is variable depending on the mission and things like that. Who's with him, who's not. And he's, in my army list, he's accompanied by a Cold Star commander. And this Cold Star commander was previously unenlightened by in the perspective of the enclaves, and viewed them as traitors, as the Ethereal had basically proclaimed. And by working with Swiftcloak has kind of brought him into the fold. And so in official business, the Cold Star commander still maintains superiority because he is a Chasseau instead of a Chaznel. But when they are out on missions, Swiftcloak kind of is a little bit more experienced. He has a direct line of communication, or so he says, with the enclaves. And so in these kind of small scale battles where it's just Swiftcloak and his bros, Swiftcloak calls the shots, and the Cold Star is there really more of a support kind of guy. So the list starts off with, yes, Cadre Fireblade with a Pure Tide Engram Neurochip and through Unity Devastation, and then I have a Cold Star Commander with 3 Fusion Blasters and then the Supernova Launcher. For troops, I brought a unit of 9 Fire Warriors, 10 Breachers, and then 2 more units of 10 Fire Warriors and Strike Teams. For elites, I brought a Riptide with the usual loadout: heavy burst cannon, target lock, advanced targeting, smart missile systems. I brought a unit of 4 stealth suits with a homing beacon. I brought a unit of 3 crisis suits, each with 2 cyclic ion blasters and a flamer each, as well as 4 shield drones. For fast attack, I brought 7 pathfinders, and they also have a pulse accelerator drone. And then I have a unit of tactical drones, which are 4 shield drones. I brought a Sunshark bomber and a Devilfish, and that wraps up to 1499 points. So that's the base list. That's a 1500 point list, and it worked out fairly well for me. So on day 1, we're using these 1500 point lists. My first game was against Dark Eldar, and essentially the scenario was the Relic. I was defending a cathedral, and my opponent was trying to acquire this. I think it was like a homing beacon is what it was supposed to be, but yeah. My opponent was trying to attack and get this beacon, and the special rule for the table was that all Xenos would get +1 to their charge and advance rolls, whereas there were different rules for Chaos and Demons and for the Imperium, but for Xenos, this was what we got, and that was kind of uneven matchup from the beginning, just because I had my stealth suits, which were infiltrators, so they could deploy right on top of the Relic, take it and walk away. And so that was how that game played out, basically. The Dark Eldar were really aggressive, a lot of raiders, very quick, and he brought patrol from each different sub-faction for Dark Eldar, and I hadn't played a full-scale game against Dark Eldar since their codex had come out, and so I was excited to do that, and it was a fun game. But yeah, and then just having the stealth suits on the Relic to get it on turn 1 was kind of a big advantage to begin with. Then moving on to game 2, I played against my friend Alex Hunt. You might recognize him from his work painting, but Alex brought his Grey Knights, and we were playing on a haunted battlefield, which for Grey Knights was kind of funny. Basically, the special rule was that it was -2 to all leadership, which hurts drones a lot. Now drones are leadership 4. It doesn't hurt Grey Knights as much, but there are still a few cases when Grey Knights did run off the table, which is kind of funny to think about. But overall, the mission here was that there were going to be these caches dropping randomly on one of 6 table regions, and you had to take and hold those, and each turn you acquired points equal to the turn at which that cache fell. So if you were holding the cache that fell on turn 1, you got 1 point. The one that fell on turn 2, 2 points, and you accumulate that every turn. Additionally, these caches, because they're falling from the sky, were accompanied by the potential for falling debris, and so there's a potential that you would take mortal wounds for being by some of these caches. The mechanic was a little bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea. So I played against Grey Knights there, and this is where I pulled out a minor loss. My previous game was a major victory. I pulled out a minor loss here, and a lot of that was just because I I got chopped up in close combat. So those Grey Knights, they'll get you. So game 3, I pulled out a major victory again. This time I was playing on a forge world, on a refinery, and there were Prometheum relays. Special rule here was that if you were standing behind them, you got a 6-up feel no pain. And there was also a bunch of exploded tanks that would periodically explode and do mortal wounds to units that are nearby them. So that was the basic setup here, and I was playing against Necrons. They, in this particular scenario, the way that it worked was that unlike the previous scenario where you had to take and hold, it was take and go. So you went and you would tap an objective, and you could run away and then tap a different objective the next turn with the same unit. And you didn't have to have anyone controlling that first initial objective unless someone else tapped it, right? So once you control it, it is still yours, and you still accumulate points for it. And so it's kind of like this game of tag where you want to run and get an objective one turn, and then the next turn go get a different one. And if you can cap all the objectives, then you're going to be in a really good spot. And so that one played out in a way that essentially I got a pretty early lead by taking out some units early on and acquiring nodes or objectives pretty early in the game, and then my fire warriors were pretty much castled up and didn't allow my opponent to go and get those other things. So that was actually a pretty quick game, unfortunately, and it was a major victory for me. So at the end of day one, I was 2 major victories and 1 minor loss. Again, I had a great time with all my opponents. I thought it was really well done, and I had a lot of fun with all the scenarios, even though they were, totally different than what I was expecting. So I was super happy with how everything went. Day 2 was a little bit different. We, instead of doing 1,500 point lists, we had to pare down to 1,250, and everything that was in your 1,250 list had to be in your 1,500 list. So basically, that means you couldn't just add a unit. You couldn't add units to your 1,250 list to bring it to 1,250 and drop bigger units and stuff like that. So it's actually kind of a complicated thing to do. Not exactly the easiest thing to do, but so in order to get my 1,500 list down to 1,250, I dropped a fire warrior from each of the strike teams and a breacher from the breacher team, dropped a stealth suit, dropped the homing beacon, dropped a pathfinder, and I dropped the sun shark bomber, and that gets me down to right around 1,500, or not 1,500, 1,250, and so with these 1,250 lists, you paired up with someone from your faction. So I was playing Restoration, so I paired up with another Restoration player in both games 4 and 5. In my first game, everyone played the same mission, so this was different than in day 1. In day 1, everybody played different missions based on what table they were at. And on day 2, everyone played the same mission. That mission was control the pylon on your planet. So now there is only seven different pylons, 7 different planets, and there were people vying for control of them quite literally on each table. And the pylons were actually constructed. You had I don't know how tall they were, like 3 feet tall pylons that were sitting in the middle of the table that looked really cool. And they broke apart to indicate if destruction or restoration were in control of them. And so we went the first game. Basically, it worked out where there was 4 different nodes around the pylon, and those nodes would either give health to or take health away from the pylon. And if you ended up with positive health, then the restoration team won, and if you ended up with negative health, then the destruction team won at the end of the game. And I paired up with Deathwatch, and my opponents were Nurgle and Space Wolves. So again, one of those instances of traditional Imperial army being on the destruction side, which was fun. We had some jokes about that. That was fun. But in general, it worked out where we were able to pull out a major victory here as well, a major win. And I think a lot of that was just due to kind of pushing the flank, and a lot of the Nurgle units ended up tying up one side of the board, and so that left the other side of the board for everything else to go. And I tried to stay out. Well, yeah, I almost stayed out of combat. I actually charged my Devilfish into a unit of Plague Marines. But I stayed out of combat as much as possible, and yeah, it worked out. But overall here, we ended up with a restoration victory, meaning that pylon was restored. Moving into game 5, the scenario was now if you control the pylon, you're going to try to, keep it that way. And so in game 5, I ended up pairing up with Space Wolves against the same Nurgle player and White Scars. So again, another Imperial army playing destruction. And this scenario was very challenging, especially if you were the attacker. So essentially, the setup here was that the defender gets to deploy in a circle around the pylon, wherever that is, and then also on one table edge. And then the attacker has to basically deep strike in or come in off of a table edge. And so there's nothing from the attacker on the board at the beginning of turn 1. Everything of theirs comes in over the next couple turns. And that's really challenging, especially if the defender takes up a bunch of landing space. I was thinking about if this was the other way around, and I can't imagine actually being able to get a lot of my units on the table just because there wouldn't be enough room. So the idea here was that there were two things going on. One was there were these random points around the board that would essentially suck units into them. So if you were within 12 inches, you roll and you move d6 inches towards that point. And if you end up touching it, then that unit takes d3 mortal wounds. So you can kind of imagine these as like little black holes and stuff on the table. So that made things challenging too, because you had to avoid that. And then there were also these macro charges that the attackers were trying to bring to the pylon to blow it up. And if those ended up far away from the pylon, then restoration gained points. If they ended up on top of the pylon, then destruction gained points at the end of the game. And it worked out in a way that we just were able to keep those macro charges away from the board, I thought, or away from the pylon. And I thought for sure about halfway through the game that it was all going to fall apart and we were going to end up losing. But again, in the end, we ended up pulling out a major win. So overall, I ended up with 4 major wins and 1 minor loss. I think that placed me in third, tied for third for battle points. And I ended up 6 overall, including, sportsmanship and painting and stuff like that. So, a good performance. I'm very happy with how I did, but again, it was more about the narrative and meeting people and having fun, and I definitely did that. I had a lot of fun, and I hope all my opponents and teammates did as well. So, I guess I should point out my teammate in the last game was Nate Williams, and he ended up walking away with the Master Chronicler award. So that means he got the most points out of anybody, which congratulations, Nate. So again, just a great event. I can't wait for next year. I will definitely be there, and hopefully we'll get some more coverage next year leading up to it, and be a little bit more involved that way with it. So very excited. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions below. There are links in the description to the relevant Twitter pages. I might have some pictures in here that are from their Twitters there. So check those out for sure. And as always, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Max Harrison, Aaron Fox, Jared Egler, Nick Steele, Tao Oswald, Brian Mann, Stephen Cohen, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Tim Piney, High Penguin, Benjamin, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, Julian Peck, RP, and Giovanni DiMaggio.